Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Overall Scrutiny Committee for the South Yorkshire Mayor Combined Authority on the Thursday, the 28th of November. November's gone quickly. Apologies. I've only had apologies from Councillor Jane Kidd. No others? No. Right. Urgent. We'll swiftly move on to item 2, which is urgent items and announcements, and I believe we have none. Item 3, items to be considered in the absence of public and press. We have nothing as far as I'm concerned. I've been informed of. No. Item 4, declaration of interest by any members. Do members have any declarations of interest? Any item on the agenda? No, that's good. Reports from and questions by members on item 5. None. Questions from members of the public. This time we have none, as far as I'm aware. And then we'll move on to agenda item 7, which are minutes of the meeting held on 26th of September and the action log. Are members content that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? The last meeting was in court, and I'm asking them to note all recommendations from the papers of that meeting at this court meeting of the committee. Updates to matters arising and providing the action log provided. So we'll go through that, shall we? Right. With this on page 11 of the agenda. So, shall I go through item by item? Shall I go through page by page? Page by page, do you think? Yeah. Okay, so page 11. Anything anybody wants to bring to attention? Yeah.
Just on the first row, on community transport usage, we've got an update that's going to be captured in informal engagement with the committee, and there's a session on Thursday, the 5th of December next week, where you'll start looking at that as part of your work plan. And then on the final row of that same page, there was a query about one of the Mayor's commitments around skills provision and the skills strategy. We had an informal session last week on the 21st of November where there was a bit of clarification around that, so we can always condense that down, send it around written to members on that specific query.
Douglas?
Can I just, on 5th December, I have a thing I've got a clash with my committee then, but just generally speaking, with this in particular, can we have something circulated in advance? So written briefing's always good. We should have those really before, being asked to come to something in person, if that's possible.
I'll put that request, yeah.
Hannah?
Thanks. Do we have anything on the third item, those new accountability and scrutiny measures with the leaders, or is that a question for the Mayor?
Question.
Marvellous, thank you.
There's a bit of an addition to that, because we had a meeting with the chairs, vice chairs of the combined authorities across the country, and they were talking about this in particular. It's noted that West Yorkshire had implemented it in full. It's been through their board and implemented in full, and we haven't had anything come to the board, I don't believe, at all. So there are some that are waiting on, and hopefully we'll get some further updates to the English Devolution Bill. But it was raised by other authorities about how much of this has been implemented from the government advice that came out last December, and some authorities, including our neighbouring one in West Yorkshire, had already implemented it in full. Right, shall we move on to page 12? Anything to raise there? And page 13. Have we had any further update on what Councillor Naz had asked about translations at all? Do we know at all?
I know that So Lawrence Wilson, our Interim Director of Public Transport Operations, is down next to that. I know that a member of his team has met with Councillor Naz to look at work around a comms plan. But again, there's a session in as part of your work plan next week, one of your online teams, where hopefully they can expand on that a bit more. Or the committee can unpick and decide what else is needed and what's next.
Yeah, so can I jump in first? Yeah, so yeah, just what standing arrangements do we have at Simca for translation of materials? Do we have an agreed process? Do we have a policy on what languages we use and how we choose which ones and in what circumstances we do that?
Not my area of expertise, no. I'm afraid, but I'm happy to take that away and hopefully pass it through for your session next week, and also get something written from our comms team probably on that.
Thank you.
Can we put that on the action log then? That'd be useful
yes.
to.
I would say put it on the action log. Yeah, just Josh.
I'm so sorry, Chair, but I wasn't here last meeting, so if somebody could just give a quick overview on that. What is the situation there?
Translation. Councillor Naz had asked, was having a separate and had a discussion, I believe, with some of the officers that were here at the meeting after the meeting to see what it was, and so we really do need an update. That would be quite useful.
Context was just there was an introduction to community transport from the service area. Councillor Naz raised queries about do we translate information about community transport into community languages? If not, can we? Thank you, Councillor.
I think it was also around the consultation, how we use translation. I think this is really important to get to all sections of the community, many of whom rely in Councillor Naz's constituency, Darnell, on public transport or community transport, and how we understand their needs and how they can put forward their views. And I think that's really important if we're going to get an inclusive transport network. And I think it's wider than, actually, I think what Councillor Johnson was talking about was wider than transport, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's for all the work that we do. Yeah. What community languages do we use? I mean, the NHS has a policy on that in Sheffield. We ought to have a policy on it, really.
I mean, if I was, my view is that it's not for the taxpayer to pay to translate services into different languages. That's a part of integration into this country. That's my view.
Just going to say that's not how it works. Yeah. If we, as an organisation, want to make our voice available to all sections of society, then we have to speak in the language that people can understand. And that goes for plain English as well as other languages. The duty is definitely on us. Really important equality point.
Right.
I believe we have a right to put it out in all languages and for all kind of things, even for people who's deaf who don't understand and that kind of stuff. We've got every right to put it out and so people can communicate. It's not easy. It's all right saying, but not everybody speaks our language. That's true, and it's difficult for some people to actually interpret it, and it gets harder as you get on in life to learn another language. And if we've got the facility and with the use of the internet and technology these days, it's not that cost effective to actually, it's not that dear to actually do it, Chair. You can actually do it. You can get things where you can turn it into their language papers and things like that. So we should be making that reasonable step. And to take a thing to say it's not for the taxpayers thing to do it. The taxpayer pays for a lot of things, but it may not want to, other people want to see it pay for. But we do it, and we have a right to actually make sure we translate to all languages where possible.
Laura.
And don't forget, people who speak community languages also pay tax. They are taxpayers. They've got a right to expect a certain level of service. Yeah. Otherwise, why would they be paying the taxes?
I think we need to go a stage further, because we've also got blind and partially sighted, where we need to ensure that they've got opportunities to use public transport. I know we did an exercise only a couple of weeks ago in one of our visitor attractions in Barnsley, and we got Barnsley Blind and Partially Sighted in to do a survey and to do and advise what would support people with their impairment to be able to enjoy. And I think we need to go further than just languages. We need to ensure that we do access for people with disabilities. And again, I agree with Brian that people who are hard of hearing have got that other opportunity, which we need to be exploring.
I can see nobody else has anything else to say on that, so we'll move on to the next.
Do you mind if I just go back?
Yeah, go on.
So just, it's the item on, well, it's a skills strategy, and I didn't quite really understand what this, what the words in this box means, but it does say that at the last meeting, in fact in July, the Mayor was going to write to members around the operation of the scheme. Did he actually do that? If so, it's completed. If he didn't, then why not?
So I believe in terms of implementing the Mayor's manifesto, work is still ongoing, and that writing to the committee could still follow. But the in informal engagement with the committee, our Director of Skills gave a bit of clarification on that last week. So I'll recirculate the recording and also get a written. We'll attach it to Action Log. And please, Councillor. Yeah.
I attended the informal briefing last week, and I raised the issue about hyperlocal delivery rather than commissioning regionally. I think that's reflected in them. I think that was what I raised. I was very happy with the progress last week, with the response from the Director and Assistant Director of Skills Strategy. I think it certainly fits, Mick, doesn't it, with what we were arguing about it being located in communities to get to those furthest away from the labour market. And I know there is an extensive network in Sheffield, less so in the 3 other boroughs, but that is being addressed, and we discussed that in the meeting last week, didn't we? It was. I thought I was very happy with that meeting.
Can I just come back? But I mean, just on that, just as a matter of process and governance, if this committee makes a specific request for the Mayor to, and there's an action agreed that the Mayor will write to members, then we kind of should have some expectation that that will be done. Even if there is more information to come later on, and even if that letter can be fleshed out with, very useful informal conversations, but it ought to be done there. I mean, this was in July. If nothing's actually happened since to follow up this point, it doesn't make this committee or the Mayor look particularly good.
I think we need to chase this up and say when's this going to happen, because we have other who have actions to partake of elsewhere. Should we move on to the review of the latest forward plan of key decisions? The forward plan of key decisions at the time of publishing papers is attached to this pack, which includes key decisions to be taken at the upcoming December MCA board meeting. I will take that as read, but if we got any questions on the forward plan, I'll go through page by page, obviously. Page 17 on the Brownfield Housing Fund.
There's a planned decision date, 19th of November, which is 9 days ago. Do we have decisions on those?
Sometimes we anticipate a decision date, and for whatever reason, decisions are delayed. We don't take them off the plan, but that's where we get sometimes a disconnect.
Can I ask though, has the decision been done? I mean, yes. Oh, right. Okay, not done yet. No. Right. Okay. And same with the other one. Sorry. Yeah. No, it was the question you asked, and I just didn't hear an answer. I heard the explanation of why it was still on the plan, but not that it hadn't been done. And do we know when it is going to be done, or is it just hanging?
The approach to national bus fare cap on page 18. That's the decision, because I note that Liverpool, West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester are keeping the cap at £2 for now, all of them. So, question for the Mayor, there you go. Stocksbridge Town deal, funding. And then we've got a second one on the approach to the bus fare, where part exempt information, it says. national bus fare cap, so we obviously can't.
Is it? That seems to be on there twice.
Yes.
Is it a duplicate? And are papers confidential or not? Anyone know?
Papers are due to be published on Monday next week, so more information will come out in the publication then. Yes, that is a duplication. The empty box row shouldn't be there.
Yeah. I took that as being, but it's whether that was there because it's some part exempt information, which having. Yeah, was it just a typo? Because I just wondered, because obviously I've now read the Constitution and we are not entitled to any exempt papers. Page 19, obviously child notified fare policy, so I presume that is something that will come with the, any increases will come along with any notification of the bus fare cap. The framework agreement for engineering service for a period of 4 years, covered 5 separate lots, which are quite technical. Anybody got any questions for that? Obviously. And on page 20, UK Shared Prosperity Fund applications 2024-25. Any questions on that? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, Laura.
Am I right in thinking this is the final year of the Shared Prosperity Fund? That.
It's been extended for another year.
That's what I mean, but the final year, isn't it?
Yes, so this year would be the normal final year
Yeah.
of what was the original allocation, but in the budget they've extended it for another year.
So we've got 1 year and then
Yes.
a cliff edge.
Yes,
Yeah.
at the moment, yeah.
That's the point I'm trying to make. We need to.
Sure, it'll come back some form under a swanky new name, under a new government. Obviously, you know, I mean, this is my life.
Not shared.
Yeah, it'll be something like the prosperity of sharing funds or something. Right, there we go. Anyway, on to the next item on the agenda, which is now, are we? Item 9, update on the English Devolution Bill and Autumn Statement, and I will welcome Andy Gates to give us a presentation, etc. on this. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I am reliably told that if you've got slides in your pack, there's not a huge amount of value in me running through each and every slide because you've read them. So what I will do, though, is use them as a crib sheet for me and then take questions. So I'll just go straight to the Shared Prosperity Fund point. Lindsay is absolutely right, but the government in the budgets, so it's the Shared Prosperity Fund is 38% reduced for 25-26. There were real concerns that it would disappear entirely. Interestingly, or not, depending on how excited you get about this sort of thing, the government did say they would use the 25-26 allocation as a transition. A transition to what? Absolutely unclear, but it's a very neat segue into the integrated settlement work that the devolution, that the Chancellor's budget confirmed, because Shared Prosperity Fund is something that is extremely likely to get wrapped up into our Simca's, South Yorkshire's integrated settlement. Anyway, let's go right back to the start. So just really quickly, you all know the Chancellor delivered a budget on the 30th of October. It was a one-year budget designed really to get the government to the multi-year spending review, which will take place and conclude in spring 2025. That is where the sort of departmental budgets over a 2, 3, 4 year period will be set. So that's the kind of the thing we're really looking at now. In the context, we knew all the mood music about the budget was that this wasn't where any Whitehall taps were going to get turned on financially. So our submission as an MCA was fairly modest in the sense of it asked for the things that we were really interested in securing. Confirmation on Shared Prosperity Fund, the existing commitments made to all Mayoral combined authorities around long-term transport funding, We call that CRSTS, City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. All of those things we were anxious about as an MCA, and not just South Yorkshire. So our submission really sought to secure some certainty around those, and we were pleased that the budget did. The Chancellor sort of set out particularly things like the transport settlement wasn't going to get reduced or disappear entirely. That is of course fantastic for us, but the whole point of a long-term transport settlement is it is long-term. So, you know, it is still TBC for the financial year 26-27 onwards. But the fact that it stayed the same in the next financial year may or may not be a signal. We are still waiting for further clarity on the breakdown of the big spreadsheet that the Treasury publish alongside their spending review. We are getting some signals on what our bus service improvement plan BSIP funding would look like, and similarly with the Shared Prosperity Fund. Whilst they're nationally cutting that by 38%, they have not determined yet whether that 38% is a sort of salami slice against every single MCA settlement. It could easily be that they look to port cash around different places with different levels of track record of delivery. So in South Yorkshire, we've done a really good job of spending our Shared Prosperity Fund, and that's been delivered principally through a lot of our local authorities. Some MCAs, some places with Shared Prosperity Fund have not delivered particularly well against their funding profile. So some really big questions about places who haven't delivered. Should they be getting another slug, or places that have been delivering? So there's some of those negotiations probably going on behind closed doors. The budget also did set out for the first time that Mayoral combined authorities will be considered like a local council in terms of the local government finance settlement. To date, Mayoral combined authorities have not been part of that local finance settlement. So the government indicated that they were sort of going to grow that in terms of real terms funding for local government spending power. I think it was about 3.2% increase. Obviously that doesn't cover.
Would that mean that, you know, in terms of the grant from the government, that they would get a grant that would be, and the likelihood is it would be a multi-year settlement of an amount of money? Is that's
absolutely our understanding? Because at the moment, if you know, Gareth, I'm sure has talked to you at length about the way that the MCAs are funded, and it is a hodgepodge of funding streams over different timescales and with different sort of abilities free and flex. Having a line in their sort of local government finance settlement is helpful to us, and it's sort of one thing I think you'll see more of in the devolution white paper that kind of formalises the existence of combined authorities, actually puts them on that sort of formal footing, so MHCLG and Treasury can treat them as such. So it hopefully will be over the longer term, and you know, we can then plan our resource allocation accordingly. So yeah, that's certainly the plan. I know a lot of local authorities are saying, well, the increase is great, but the impact on the employer national insurance is quite a challenge. Transport, broadly the same. Housing. Oh, hello, Gareth.
Hi. Sorry to interrupt, Andy, and sorry, guys, that I can't be with you in the room today. Just a point, just to elaborate on what Andy's talked to you about the benefit of being within the local government settlement. The first one is longevity. So over the last few years, we have just been given 6-month funding, 1-year funding for our buses and our trams and so on, and it is painfully difficult for us to manage an efficient system with very short-term settlement. The other point is that not being in the settlement has been a convenient route for government to forget about us in many instances. So in the past, when things like national insurance has risen and government is saying, don't worry, for the public sector, we will see you right on this, they've forgotten about us. So we've had to bear the impact of things like the NI adjustments in the past. What we're now being told is that because we're in a single settlement, in the local government settlement, we will be funded for the national insurance rise that government have announced, and that's quite material. That would have been about £500,000 of cost pressure for us that we just don't have a route to funding. So it is a mark of the maturity of where combined authorities are getting to that were now considered as part of the overall funding settlement, and I think an acceptance from government that they need a more mature approach to how they fund us, beyond the very fragmented, very short-term ad hoc approach that we've seen in previous years.
Put far better than I was going to. Thank you, Gareth. So it does take me though neatly onto the principles of the integrated settlement. So whilst we talked about the local government finance settlement, the integrated settlement has had loads of names. I think last time I spoke to you, we talked about it being the single settlement. In previous years, it's been described as a single pot. What that is, and the MCA will secure this for the financial year 26-27, it is the long-term consolidation of funds that have previously come down to us from MHCLG, from the DFT, from the DFE, from whichever government department gives us some money to do some things that we've either bidded for or we've sort of been allocated it. Shared Prosperity Fund would be another one. Those funds are going to be all consolidated in something called an integrated settlement. So we will do that negotiation and that deal with Treasury rather than individual government departments. So it's a real signal of the government's confidence in the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, because we'll be going, GM and West Midlands are going next year. We, West Yorkshire and the Liverpool City region are going the year after. The rest are sort of playing catch up and are outside of a spending review cycle. But that similar to Gareth's point, that gives us that long-term certainty about what we're getting. It ends the competitive nature, so we will stop writing quite as many bids into government. What the government will do is have a allocation formula, TBD, as to how that's constructed, but we'll get funds given to us to invest rather than having to bid or get sort of top slice here and there. So it's really welcome. It will enable us to move money across those. So at the moment we can't move money from, I don't know, the Department for Transport into a capital project on something else. We have very little ability to move money across the programme. The whole point of the integrated settlement is that we will have the ability to invest money against a set of agreed outcomes rather than agreed programme lines. Yeah.
Are you going to have to produce a business plan to say what you want the funding for? Because they're not just going to give you a settlement and walk away, are they? No. You've got to have some strategic outcomes that you want for that, surely.
Yeah, and this is the bit that is going to be quite hard to work through, and we're rather glad actually Greater Manchester and West Midlands are going first because they're doing a lot of the hard work on the process. There's a few things. We'll be treated more like a government department going into bat with the Treasury. So, you know, government department has to go and say, I want to do these 5, 10, 15, 20 things, and the Treasury will kick them around and say, that's nonsense, what does that deliver? So we'll have to do a similar type process. The way that they would like it to happen, and it's a very sensible approach, is that we would agree a set of outcomes. So we might say we want to increase our productivity growth by X, the number of skilled people by Y, and we may have 5, 6, 7 of those outcomes. They will be the kind of test with government around, so we're not all spending on paper clips or whatever, we're spending in the pursuit of those outcomes. So that's a lot of hard work coming on that to have the level of granularity about what can you actually achieve with the funding you've got, and some of the outcomes we're seeking to achieve take a long time to turn the tanker around. So how all that works will be really interesting, and I'm really glad Greater Manchester and West Midlands are going first.
I foresee more work for this committee because basically if the authority is going to be able to shift money from one place to the other because there may be an overspend, then we've got to look at why that overspend, potentially if it's going over certain bounds, why it's happening, and see what needs to be, and that's either for us or the audit committee. And I presume if it's spending that's exceeding, because there are one or two projects which have the financial outcomes that are happening at the moment, which could be massively overspent potentially, that we'll want to have a closer dive into, especially if you potentially now have the ability to take it from one pot without any, because it's outside of a funding stream, and then move it into another one within the authority. So that would undoubtedly mean more work for those with this committee or the audit committee to have to look at to see whether, you know, what's going on there, basically.
I think you're absolutely right. It will change how the MCA has to make its decisions, and how it is scrutinised accordingly. Completely agree.
Just got two questions. One is, sorry. Two questions. First one is, does the funding for the police come into the integrated settlement? I don't know if you know.
No.
It doesn't. Right, so that'll be separate. Okay, so you can't plug that 65 million hole there, or vice versa. Okay, just clear that one out of the way. But the other thing is about, so what's the approach to, how is SIMP going to define what are its big pictures it wants to take to government? I mean, and is it going to be, you know, cross-authority, cross-party, cross-whatever? Is there a process in mind there, or are there any commitments that Simca will give to us around the table?
So the first question I've answered, which was around the police and crime, that's the easy one. No. The second one is a really good question. I probably don't have enough license yet to give you the full answer on it. But what I would say is that if the outcomes drive our investment programme, it's the agreement of the outcomes that really matter. And that takes you into the world of, have we got the right strategic framework in place across our patch for us to determine what our outcomes are, whether they're environmental, housing growth, skills, business growth, productivity, whatever, safety, community safety, all of those things. So I think that is we are very conscious that that's some of the work we need to do. We know Greater Manchester and the West Midlands have done exactly that piece of work, and the answer comes out, well, we're a bit short on this, we're a bit light on this. So there is a programme of work we now need to do. Now we know we're going to be an integrated settlement place in 26-27. That is a fundamental part of it. I would say the outcomes are right, rather than focusing on projects and programmes, because we've played that game with government for years around projects and programmes. And it leads us down to a really narrow set of conversations.
I mean, I just think it would be useful to find that, agree with that. That process makes sense. I mean, focus on outcomes is what changes things for the better for people in South Yorkshire. But to do that, I think I'd like to make a pitch that there is a proper, fairly open process about how we collectively have that conversation across all 4 districts about what we actually want, because it's the sort of stuff that we argue about all the time about, you know, we all want the best, but we argue about what is the best. And my worry would be that it would be taken away by, you know, perhaps a fairly small group of professionals to come up with something that might be quite good, equally might have completely missed the point. So, and I suppose ideally I'd want a kind of commitment from the mayor that he will do that, but he's not here today, is he? Well, he's not here now anyway.
Well, surely some of the outcomes will be set by the government anyway. If they're going to be funding the programmes, they'll want a certain amount of houses building, they'll want a certain amount of jobs being created in the economy, because then they bring income back. So surely part of that strategy will be working with the government to achieve those outcomes, to get the money in the first place.
It's an excellent point, and that is probably why the government are really keen that we develop a local growth plan, and that they want to work with us very closely on what that growth plan looks like and how it interfaces with the new National Industrial Strategy. So it's certainly, we know that is not the way they intend to control what we do. It is certainly the way they would like to influence it. But on the things you've listed, housing growth, economic growth, skills development, you know, we're not a bazillion miles away in terms of the themes. It may be how you do them and which priority you attach, the level of priority you attach to them, that is where it gets interesting.
It's a way of control, it's a way how they feed the money into you. If you put the right strategy in, if they want this certain programme delivering, all governments have done it, no matter what political colour they are. If that's in their manifesto and they want to grow out housing, which is quite clear, but this government's got a plan to grow housing, and to grow housing you also increase jobs, because people need to build. So this is a certain strategy what the government use. Yeah, they'll not force you, but they'll coerce you into working with them.
No, just make, would this then mean that as the scrutiny committee, that if you're given a single assessment, that we need to probably not from this year, but if it's going to happen for the year after next, that we would have to have a scrutiny of the budget that is being proposed by the mayor, because it's no longer single pots of money allocated for individual items, that we would want to have a, would that be something that we need to look at from, I would guess so. I mean, I can't see why not, unless there was something legally stopping us from doing that.
That should be fundamental, because it's a proposal that's going forward, and if we're looking at a forward plan or a growth plan, we need to scrutinise that that is being done correctly. But I've got just another item. We've talked about overspend. What about underspend?
Yeah.
Is there any indication that underspend can be drawn back, or would there be an opportunity for underspend to be moved to another pot, or have you got no indication at all about what they can plan to do with underspend?
I think, and I'm trying to see whether Gareth's still here. He's not. So I'll do my very best, and you can. Gareth, tell you what, I'll have a go and see whether I get it absolutely wrong. One of the principal reasons for underspend is because we're so constrained about how we invest our money. So a program slips, and you can't move the money about. An integrated settlement does enable you to manage your money in a different way, which enables you to hopefully manage some of those things that. So I think you reduce the problem. I don't think there's any. We don't know. Gareth may know, but I don't think there is an intention for clawback on this sort of stuff. But Gareth, I don't know whether you.
No, I don't think that would be in the spirit of what's intended here. And if we do this right, you don't end up with underspends, because you are able to move available resource around to other priorities anyway. And that's traditionally why we've ended up with underspends, that we've had slippage on the capital programme, but we've been screaming out for money in skills and business growth and the like, and we've not been able to wax and wane between areas that could benefit from additional expenditure and areas that were underspending. So you'd hope we were given the tools not to get to that space, but even if we did, the principle would be that we would then have a mature conversation about what we did with that money, how we redeployed it against the outcomes that we'd agreed with government, not that they just hoover it back and say, sorry about that, you've fallen short. So that's the entire spirit. Just a couple of things, I think, just to flavour the conversation as well. One of the things Andy's in his very thorough readout of this has not mentioned is one of the real benefits of the integrated settlement is government are committed to allowing authorities to convert 10% of capital allocations into revenue. So we know that traditionally we've been funded reasonably well for our capital expenditure, but not so well for our revenue. And this leads to perverse consequences where we have lots of things like active travel programs, but we have no money to support behaviour change and do training, where we build out fabulous world-leading economic institutions like the Advanced Manufacturing Park up at Catcliffe, but we can't get anyone there because we can't afford a bus route. So this will allow us to use our revenue and capital money fungibly between each other, and it'd be much more efficient. So we can join the dots between our funding. And I think my final point, and it's one just, I guess, for us to think about, maybe discuss in a bit more detail around the role of the committee. I think the fundamental change that this brings is not around the budget, it's around the maturity of our strategies and our ability to have good political conversations about where our aspirations are and how we match money towards it. The actual detail of the budget should be dynamic. So I would suggest that the committee focus on the outcomes framework and the approach to determining those outcomes rather than the budget. Because if we get to an integrated settlement, our budget should be very dynamic and it should almost be changing quite quickly, so that we can move money around and we can maximise the flexibilities of it. So if you only see the budget once a year or every quarter or so on and so forth, you probably always be behind the curve in terms of the decision making. But if you scrutinise and provide input on the overall outcomes framework, it means that your role has influenced every decision that's been made thereafter. So I think that's perhaps where the community can add best value, and how you can get some assurance that decisions are happening within a framework that you've previously seen and understood and commented on.
All I'd say to that is that it's with the budget and the dynamism that you're talking about, is also there is the possibility that with the amounts of money that Simca has at its disposal, is likely to gather the government assessment, there could become very quickly some very adverse finances, which meant on certain projects that could mean that there could be depletion of money adversely to other projects. So that's something that as a committee we need to make sure that we somehow build it into how we operate, because it's one thing to say, oh, this is all dynamic and we spend it and we've got to be fluid and we've got to be quick, but sometimes there needs to be something, a group of people such as us that we are, to have a look at it and say, hey, hang on, what's going on here?
I guess the point Gareth's trying to make there is that if we are looking at outcomes, if there's a project that isn't moving along and that isn't happening, or then that's when you kind of circle back and say, has all the money from this been poured into something else? Because fundamentally, if all the outcomes are being delivered, maybe they need to think of new outcomes to add in as well, but I suppose if all the outcomes are being delivered, then that gives us reassurance that the money's being spent in the right place to some extent.
I always believe there's got to be checks and balances on budgets anyway, because if you just leave it to just people to just move money where they want, there's got to be some way and some correct procedures to make sure that when money's being moved around, it's being used for different projects, but there's some safeguards in that. I've always said that whichever organisation, and you've got to have the safeguards, and if this committee is a safeguard, it's a safeguard, and if we need to look at budget 6 monthly or 3 monthly, we need to look at it, but there's got to be some safeguards in it, Chair.
My first question you've answered, Gareth, which was about capital and revenue split, because that's always been an issue, and that's really welcome that we can convert 10% to revenue. I agree, I can see both points. I agree about it's got to be dynamic, because if something is delivering more outcomes, we've got to be able to put more resources into it. And my experience on the Objective 1 Programme Management Board was that it was totally inflexible. You allocated money to projects and then they never moved. So some under-delivered and some over-delivered. And we should have had the ability to move between them and say, that isn't working, we need to change direction. Or that can give us more bang for our buck. We've got to have that flexibility. So I really welcome the dynamic approach. I know there's got to be checks and balances, but broadly, any successful organisation has to be prepared to change course if something's not working, and move to doing things differently.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, apologies if this was already explained, Gareth. But I just had a question on the 10% that can be converted into revenue. Would that 10% would that then go into a general fund, or would it be project specific?
So I think the way it's working with Greater Manchester and West Midlands is money is assigned essentially to what is referred to as pillars, and those pillars are related to the outcomes that Andy's described. So if you imagine that the Department of Transport might give us a significant block of capital funding to deliver on capital aspirations, what they might allow us then to do is say, here's £100 million to deliver schemes, but we will allow you to take 10 million of that 100 and use that for revenue purposes to support that pillar of transport programs. So that would allow us essentially to spend money on things like bus services or passenger incentives or feasibility studies or any of the things that actually create the conditions for that capital investment to thrive. What we see too often is that we will build some infrastructure, but because we've not got the revenue money to allow people to enjoy that infrastructure or maximize the use of it, it often doesn't have the impact that we want it to. So none of this will be a free lunch. I think it's been, people have grasped that government will one way or another provide some conditions over how we use it. But what all this points to is additional flexibility on how we can best achieve the outcomes, and the outcomes we still have to agree with government.
The last thing I want to talk about, and it may be that I can save you some time here, about the devolution white paper. I couldn't possibly say, but we're expecting it really, really, really soon. So I could give you a whole bunch of speculative sort of thoughts about what may or may not be in it, but I suspect really soon you'll be able to give you you'll be able to have a view of it and maybe even a detailed note from officers on what's in it versus a kind of me talking around the houses because there's not stuff I can put into the public domain that we're probably aware of privately, Chair. It's just
I'd say that as a committee that one of the things we will need to have organised is very soon after the white paper. I know it's one of those that we'll have to be dynamic in making sure that we get when we see the white paper that we get a good briefing quite soon afterwards. We're gonna need it to know what's likely to be in it, that sort of thing. Thank you very much. Thanks for the briefing. Thank you, Gareth. Right, we're going to move on to item 11, which is the gateway review from. Have I skipped one? Sorry. I'm going mad here. Sorry. Item 10, analysis and insight capability from Kate Miska. Yeah. Sorry for skipping over you.
Great, does that work? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making the time to have me on the agenda. So, yes, as I was introduced, my name's Kate Miska, and I've put a small paper in your pack around the development of our analytical capacity and capability, and also an update on the development of our performance reporting, which is something that we briefly talked about in the work planning workshop in June. So I won't cover, at length what's in the pack, but I will just bring out a few highlights if that works. And I'm really looking forward to getting your questions. So I've joined the MCA as Director of Insight to address the development of our analysis and insight capability alongside our corporate plan and our performance reporting. We are building on a good starting point. So we have about 20 analysts at the moment, and they support our priorities, including cost of transport, skills, performance reporting. And I think this is quite a good follow-on item from the conversation that we just had with Andy, because developing that analytical function is important as we move towards integrated settlement, because we will need to ensure that the funding decisions that we make are well informed with evidence, and also we need to inform central government, essentially, with evidence on what works that we can then feed back from the regional level into creating better outcomes across the UK. So we have a work programme with 3 strands, which I've outlined in the paper. I'll just bring out a couple of highlights. So the first strand is around setting ourselves up for business case success. And you might think, after what Andy said around integrated settlement, why is this still a thing? But it is, because we will still, I'm sure, need to bid to government through business cases for various pots of funding. But even more importantly, I think we need to ensure that we use business cases as a way to design really good policy here in South Yorkshire. So it's actually about the thought process as well as the securing of funding. So we've spent some time looking at our cases, the cases that we've made to government, and to identify what good looks like and where cases can be weaker. And as a result, we have been delivering a series of learning and development that we have developed with central government, so with HM Treasury and MHCLG, and that is for SIMCA and our local authorities. And we've run the first session of that, is well attended, so we had nearly 100 people from our local authorities, which was great. We're also boosting some of our specific analytical capacity areas, so particularly around economics and modelling and case making. So we are recruiting 2 specialist new roles in transport, which is obviously a huge area for us. And we're also starting to refresh Simcoe's corporate plan, which I referred to in the paper. But why that's important here is it helps to provide some helpful strategic framing for our business cases and our bids to government. The second strand then is how we're working with our partners on a shared approach to analysis and insight. So we work with lots of partners in this space. So we're engaging with our LAs, partners in South Yorkshire Police and the Integrated Care Board on how we can develop our research and analysis together. And in particular, something we've started to do is work with our university partners around potentially developing some areas of research interest. So to try and explore those key areas that are important strategically to us across South Yorkshire, where we can really leverage the great resources that there are in the university sector here to help answer some of those questions that we currently don't have an answer to. And we've also been working closely with government departments, analytical officers based in South Yorkshire to look at how we can better collaborate and do better policy making with them. The third strand then fits really directly with what Andy said. So as part of our thinking around integrated settlement, we need to think around how we will need to further develop the analytical function. Really early days on that at the moment. So we've started to have conversations with other MCAs, such as Greater Manchester, who are further down that journey of integrated settlement to think about what that will need to look like. Sure, we'll hear more about that over the next 18 months, along with the wider work programme around integrated settlement. And then the final piece, I just promised something specific around our performance reporting. So we talked about it in June at the work planning workshop. We have a really small team that works on performance reporting, but they have developed an in-house corporate performance reporting system, something that we own ourselves. It's really flexible. And what we've been focusing first since we last spoke is on reporting for the MCA Executive Leadership Board as the first port of call. Really focusing on our corporate health reporting, so looking at what they receive on finance, on risk, things like mandatory training, correspondence, etc. All the kind of things to do with like the running of the business, essentially. And we've also been working on linking our programme reporting system that reports like all the kind of big spending programmes that we deliver across South Yorkshire into our performance reporting system. And we've also begun the process of reporting, refreshing the corporate plan. That was last updated in 2022. It's a standard governance document, something that we need to refresh to basically take into account all the many changes since 2022. And we'll then look at how we feed that through to our performance reporting. That will be a focus over the next year, so that we make sure we're capturing, not just what we're delivering, but also how we're doing it, how we engage with people, for instance, would be an important thing that we would hope to measure in a future round of performance reporting. Yeah, I'll stop.
With the performance reporting,
Yeah.
this is one of the things that we just do in the previous item. For instance, when you're talking about the dynamic budgeting that you're talking about, because one of the things that would be very useful as part of the information, as part of that performance reporting system, would be, we're saying that we want to have dynamic budgets, being able to take from overspend or things doing particularly well. Well, one of the things would be that if there were within the analysis going on, is whether, say, there was a variance of 10% or something. I'm just picking a figure out there of a budget that you've moved from here to here. Then that's there would be sort of somehow thresholds within that performance reporting where you'd say this is why this has gone. The variance of this budget, we've increased this by 15.6% or whatever, and we consider this within the reason, and this is the reason why, because that's the information that would be useful for us to come back to say this is something that we should be looking at in more depth about why this is 33% over budget when you're that sort of thing. Is that what you're also looking at within the authority in terms of some of your the analysis you're doing, some of the reporting, some of with the stats you're going to be looking at within that? Is that what you're going to be looking to doing to flag up things, as well as saying this is what because it would only be a good thing for the authority then to turn around, the board to turn around and say this is the reason why we increase this, because the revenue that is generated or the outcomes it's generated have been this much in excess of so the benefit is much greater because we've moved that budget around. Because obviously then there'll be other budgets and there is no it's just overrun in terms of costs. That's all, and that's the sort of thing we would be more interested in.
Yeah, so I think it's the kind of conversation that we should pick up with the finance team around the link between the performance reporting, which is really around like what we are delivering and how we are doing it, and how that links together with the finance system. So I think, as you can see, there's a huge amount of work that we will need to do like over the next 18 months to get ready for integrated settlement. I think some of those questions around how you deal with those variations in budgets and how you take those decisions across the piece, now you have that extra flexibility, that will be all the kind of thing that we will need to work through. The performance reporting at the moment, it doesn't focus on that by individual lines. But it can look at, for instance, we have worked to link it up with the system that reports on our projects and programs, so you can see how much has been spent on a particular program, where is it, ideally you would look at where would it be compared to where you'd hoped it would be at that point, etc. So it's the kind of thing you can look to develop going forward.
It's just because under the single settlement and how that works, that's the particular thing, because obviously you haven't got budget lines as you had before, or pots of money that you'd been allocated by government. You're being given and then so the walls have dissolved between the money pots you've been given, and now that's in a pot which has been allocated as a whole by the Simca board. I'd say.
I can see Gareth online. I don't know if he wants to come back on that specific point, but we would still be looking at the spend on each individual project and how that is progressing.
Yeah, thanks, guys. The way that you just described it, Chair, is perfect. I'll ask my team to rewatch this because you're absolutely right in what you've just described. So one of the big challenges for us in this is moving the finance function away from operating in a world where you operate essentially with 40 separate small budgets because you were so constrained about what you could do with those. So your reporting was really quite simple. It was dead linear. And now it'll have to mature out. And one of the things we talk about quite a bit is developing out a much more strategic finance function beyond where we are today. So we designed a finance function for our operating environment that will fundamentally change. And we will have to be able to prepare management information and financial reporting to do exactly what you've just described. And that's a bit of a fundamental shift for us from where we are today. So it's a bit of a challenge, and I often have to catch myself that you got to be careful what you wish for, because we're importing a whole heap of work for myself and my team in making sure we're ready for all this.
Thank you. Laura?
So as I see it, there's two parts to this, isn't there? There's the economic analysis and the insight before we do anything that informs what we do. And then there's the monitoring as to whether that is effective or not. But it's important to get the first part right, or else everything else fails. And then we see whether that analysis was correct. Is it working? Is it having the desired effect? And if not, so we rag rate that in effect. And if not, what do we do to remedy it? Is that correct?
I think that is a really good articulation of the cycle that we're trying to set up.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And so it's around, I think this paper really is around how we build both sides of that. So how we build the first bit, so we have really good evidence on what the problem is, whether our investment is likely to solve it, and then exactly that monitoring piece and the evaluation that goes into it. So how's it worked? Is it, not just is it delivering outputs, but actually is it delivering the outcomes? It comes back to the wider questions around the outcomes.
Because we could have an economic shockwave, something that can happen that changes our analytical model from the beginning, and then we've got to look at the consequences of that and how we remedy it, don't we? Yeah.
Hannah?
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick question. I think you did sort of start to allude to it, but while you were talking about working with our partners on our shared approach to analysis and insight, to what extent do you share data with and get data from other combined mayoral authorities? So it does talk about looking at authorities across Yorkshire and the Humber, and then, like I say, you sort of alluded to it at the very end about beginning to engage with colleagues and other MTAs. Is that suggesting that this is not something that has been done up till now, and how much of it do you intend to do going forwards?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think there's questions wrapped up in there around like what data you're able to share and kind of data sharing agreements, etc. And some of the partnerships that we're involved in, particularly across Yorkshire and the Humber, are in this space. Particularly around, I think we mentioned like the Yorkshire and Humber Office for Data Analytics. You know, there's all kinds of things there that are aimed around bringing together all the data that we have, like around Yorkshire and the Humber in particular, and putting it into a really usable format so we can all make the best use of it for research and analysis. In terms of other MCAs, so I think, you know, there is a bunch that we already do in terms of work with MCAs through various forums, sharing of research, for instance, on transport, etc., like, you know, like the annual travel survey and that type of thing that we do. So that information is, you know, we have that cross-sharing, cross-working with them. But what we really want to work further with them on is like their model, essentially, for doing analysis and insight. So actually just how do they resource it? What do they focus on? Like, what have they had to do that's different as they start to think about integrated settlement? So that's going to be an important thing for us going forward over the next 18 months. Early days, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Welcome, Lindsay Whitaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about the Gateway Review. So just to explain what the Gateway Review is, we have a set of devolution investment funds that are awarded to us by government, and it's the settlement that you might have heard of, the £30 million per annum over 30 years. It's known as devolution investment funds. We refer to it as gain share, but effectively it's the most flexible form of funding that we have at the MCA because it can fund anything to do with economic development and regeneration. It can also be used to plug any funding gaps with any other funding streams that we have coming into the organisation, such as CRSTS, Levelling Up Fund, which has also gone out to the local authorities as well. So it does have some flexibilities. The Gateway Review process itself is the national evaluation by government into how we are spending and investing that gain share funding. So it's been quite an intensive process looking at everything in terms of how we appraise projects and choose which investments we're making investments in. It's also looking at what the expected outputs and outcomes from those projects are, and also looking at the impact that those projects are having once they're actually in delivery. So as part of the Gateway Review process, we have had to produce a local evaluation framework which we produced way back in May last year, which identified 56 schemes that were gain share funded that we would look at in detail. And as a result of that, we had to undertake a midterm review where we had to write a series of 5 evidence papers that looked at the impact and what we were doing around capacity building and partnership development in order to deliver those schemes. It also looked in depth at some of the schemes that we had funded to identify what the lessons learned from each of the delivery of those schemes were. So it's a review that every MCA has to go through. In terms of the process that we've just concluded, all of those evidence papers for the midterm review were considered by an academic panel. That academic panel fed back some comments and queries that they wanted us to address in the final review. We've just now concluded that final review process. So it's gone to the latest series of evidence papers have gone to the independent academic panel in October. As a result of their comments and their queries, we've refined those evidence papers. There's been a bit of back and forth between us and the national evaluators to refine and finalise those papers. They have also written what is known as the final review report on how we've invested gain share funding over the last 5 years. And that report is currently being finalised on the basis of those papers. So it's due to go into MHCLG tomorrow. So we've not yet got a copy of the final review paper. The idea is that once we have got a copy of that paper, we will be publishing it on the website along with an action plan which identifies how we will action each of the recommendations that have been made from that evaluation. And that will then show how we're actioning and taking forward some of the recommendations already, and also what we plan to do in terms of actioning some of the other recommendations. In terms of the emerging findings so far, they have concluded that we have made reasonable progress in investing the gain share funding. Obviously, we only got the investment funding from July 2020, so we've had a short period of time in which to invest some of that because it's been spent on brand new schemes effectively. They have said that there was good strategic alignment in supporting inward investment, particularly around the advanced manufacturing area that South Yorkshire is known for. They've also looked at some of the individual projects. Century Business Centre, which is a project in Rotherham, it's based at Manvers, near Wathpondern. That's had a real positive impact in terms of supporting start-up and growing companies in particular, although there was a little bit of a question over whether or not that had displaced firms from other areas. So again, that's something that we need to look at in terms of how we approach our policy in terms of funding projects like that. We have been notified of the fact that they would like us to strengthen our monitoring of projects and programmes generally. Mainly on the revenue side, the capital projects, the monitoring data that we have on those is actually being quite strong. There are some weaknesses in terms of the monitoring data on revenue projects that we just need to strengthen. So that'll be one of the areas that we do look to get some better milestones and data for projects going forward so that we can maintain that standard across the organisation. They were also complimentary about the detail that we do contain in our closure reports when we close down projects at the end of their life. And they have identified that that might be something that we can do on an annual basis to projects as we go forward so that we're collecting some initial feedback in terms of what the early impact of those projects is having. And the other thing that they've also identified is that where we have got other funding that is going into some of the investments that we're making and some of the projects that we're funding from other sources, we are categorising what that funding is and where the funder is coming from. But again, it's not being consistently applied. So again, they would just like us to do that so they can ascertain exactly how much public sector funding is going into these investments as a whole in compared to some of the private sector funding that we're leveraging into them as well. In terms of concluding the process then, so once we've got that final academic report that's gone off to MHCLG, we will then have a peer review session with MHCLG at some point in the new year. And that will basically be to identify anything that we need to do in terms of preparing for the next round of devolution funding or any other recommendations that MHCLG would like to make to us. But as I said, we will be preparing some a summary of the recommendations in an action plan just to indicate how we're going to take that forward. Councillor Kitchen, you asked before about how we work with other MCAs. The Gateway Review is one of the areas that we have been collaborating quite closely with other MCA colleagues on. We also have a network of assurance colleagues as well across the MCA network. And that enables us to identify differences in appraisal techniques and tools and things that we can actually apply here that are working well elsewhere. We also have that same evaluation network as well to identify the lessons learned from projects and schemes as well generally. So we're able to use the best practice from other areas as well and apply it. And I think that is about it.
Do you have a question, Douglas?
Yeah, thanks. Just two things occur to me. Is first of all, when does this committee get to see the final review report?
So we were hoping that you were going to get a copy of it today, but unfortunately it has been delayed. So as soon as it is as soon as we've got it, which as I say, it's going off to MHCLG tomorrow, hopefully, then we will make that available to members of this committee.
So you're going to circulate that, okay.
Yeah, before we publish it, yeah.
And the second question is what MHCLG will do. Do they have to approve it, or does it just go for comment, or do they have a right to change it in some way? What's the outcome of the discussions with them?
So because it's an independent evaluation, they don't really have any recourse to change anything that's actually in the report. That's the evaluators. We also only have limited options to amend some of the data in that report as well. So we can only check factual accuracies and things like that. So they can, if they want, identify some additional recommendations for us that they'd like us to action. But generally, we think that once the report is finalised by the evaluators, that will be the final report, and that will then be what is discussed with MHCLG senior officers in the new year with our senior officers here.
Did you?
No, I ain't got it.
So, when you're talking about the gateway review now, in terms of because the spend over time, because it's sort of nearly £1 billion. I presume that the spend that has happened that will go to the audit committee.
Yeah.
For them to look at in the past. Do we then get a look at what the proposals are for the forward next few years? For a period of time, obviously becoming ever sharper in focus, or is that what the intention is, or?
So because the gain share funding is just one of the many programme funds that we have coming into SIMCA, all of those projects can be picked up by audit. So when the auditors come in, they will pick a handful of projects, some of which will be gain share funded, some of which might be CRSTS funded, or a combination of the two. So they are all subject to pick up by the auditors, and then obviously that then gets presented into the reports that get presented to the Audit Standards and Risk Committee. So anything can basically be open to that level of scrutiny. In terms of obviously the recommendations and how we implement those and moving forward, then that is something that we would want to be periodically presenting, not just to this committee but also to Audit Standards and Risk Committee and to the MCA board generally, because they have identified some additional findings in terms of how we allocate the gain share funding and our approaches to that, in terms of the strategic approach that we take, where we allocate 80% of that funding out to the local authorities. So that has also been picked up in the report. So again, that might be subject to the discussion with MHCLG in the new year. But generally, I think there would obviously be scope for this panel to review the approach for future investment of gain share funding.
Because the other thing I'm not quite clear on is that the gain share funding and the single assessment, how do they interact with each other?
So gain share will effectively become part of the integrated settlement. So it will just be one of the funding pots.
So we get that in addition as part of the pot, but taken for as read that it's part of the assessment that the government gives.
That is what we understand, yes, yeah. But it might be subject to its own separate review. We don't know at the moment what is going to replace the gateway review process once that single settlement is
because that's what I was going to ask. I'm not clear about is, well, you've done all this body of work, and then if it dissolves into the single pot, if it dissolves into the single pot, then how do we know? What is the effect of that and the transfer of money from some of these things, and the gain share and the 80% or whatever it is for the individual local authorities, the money's supposed to be spent on.
Are we expecting that kind of detail about that process to be laid out in the white paper?
It might very well be. We're certainly hoping for that. At the moment, they've said that there will be an evaluation process. They just can't determine what process that will take. It doesn't, however, prevent us from continuing our own evaluation programme of our various funding streams. So, for example, the CRSTS programme, we're about to commission the evaluation of the CRSTS programme. So we will still be continuing our own local level programme evaluation for all of the funding that we have coming in. It's just that this will be the national evaluation of us in terms of investing that single settlement. But at the moment, we just don't have any information or detail on what form or process that will take.
Thank you for that. That's been very informative. If obviously, as with the early days of the new government, exactly what the process is going to be, and whether the body of work that you've done on this, how much how useful it may potentially be in future if it all becomes part of the single assessment.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that evaluation is always incredibly useful because you don't know what you don't know, and it's only when you look in depth in projects or programmes you understand what has worked, what hasn't worked, and the reasons why that has happened, and then also looking at what the added value and the impact is of what you've funded. So, speaking as someone who's responsible for the evaluation programme generally, not just Gateway Review, I will always say that there is value in assessing what you funded and then trying to apply those lessons to future funding approaches or future projects.
I see no more questions, and I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We now move on to Steve Davenport, who's going to give us an update on the bus reform consultation.
Hope everybody's well. I understand we're a few minutes behind, so I'll quickly skip through the slides so I don't take time from your main act.
We're only 4 minutes behind.
I don't want to take up the time of your main event today. So, I've got some slides if everyone's got them. So we don't need to put them up if you have. That's fine. The first slide is just literally to give you an update on the progress to date, how we got to where we are, the assessment, the audit, and then leading into this current state of consultation, which is what I'm here to sort of update you on today. So if you have any question on the first slide, or if you want to ask questions at the end, I'll throw a load of facts and figures at you on the next slide, which is probably the stuff you're more interested in. So the consultations, you're probably all aware, because you should all have been contacted, and I hope you were, because that was part of the plan that all members were contacted about this. So runs from 23rd of October to the 15th of January, so it's 12 weeks statutory consultation. We've got statutory consultation with the operators, the Competition Market Authority, Traffic Commissioner, etc. And then there's a public consultation end, which is where most of my facts and figures will be about today. There's a set of bullet points there about things we've done. We've got a significant campaign, particularly this side of the Christmas break, early in the consultation, and then continuing media and social media activity in the second half, and a lot of meetings with statutory consultees post-January, post the Christmas break. But just probably of interest to date, if I can give you these stats are as of today, we've had 3,927 completed consultation responses so far, and this week is the midweek. By the end of this week, we're halfway through the consultation. Just to put that in context, West Yorkshire got somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000, if I remember rightly. So we've got a good response rate. There's nuances in there, and I'll come on to targeted responsive targets in a minute. But presently, Sheffield make up 61% of those responses, and Doncaster 16, Rotherham 10, and Barnsley 8. Now, if we went on a population basis, that should be more 40, 20, 20, 20, there or thereabouts. So Sheffield's trending way above its population, and
we can give you some feedback on that. The Better Buses Sheffield have been plastering the city with these stickers, with their stickers everywhere, and everywhere I've turned up, they've been piles of them.
Yeah, I mean these are actual people going in and doing the responses, so they're probably attracting people to go on and do it.
They've got their QR code, which takes you through to, I presume, to your response anyway.
To the landing page. So we've got, for those that haven't seen it, we've got a landing page that's got all the documentation around that leads to the consultation, all the assessment, the short form assessment, the easy read assessment, how you respond, all those documentation are on there. So that's the stats, and we are going to do some responsive targeting of Barnsley, Rotherham in particular, going forward to try and increase the response rates in those areas. I mean, just as an example on my list of things, I noticed.
What's the response rate from Barnsley and Rotherham so far? What was it?
Rotherham 10 and Barnsley 8. I mean, just an example, this week I understand Sheffield City Council's news email, which I assume goes to every resident who's registered, has a section about this consultation. So we're going to contact the other districts and see if they'll do the same, because I'm a so, like I say, we're going to do some targeted marketing in those areas, and we're doing 100,000 of these leaflets as a household drop to harder to reach areas. So hopefully again that'll prompt some responses. So I don't know if people see the material, but it's all consistently orchestrated. So we're doing 26 drop-in events, and they're between 2 and 4 hours across the districts. So there's 26 of those, including some colleges and universities and the youth council, but a whole spread of different venues. Now I've done 3 or 4 in last week myself. So you know, I'd say attendance is mixed. Again, it's difficult to have the right time of day, the right venue, and all everything. You know, Barnsley last week the weather wasn't very great, but you know, we still had a reasonable turnout. But there's 26 of those events. We've contacted every parish council. And we've sent them a consultation pack. We've contacted 200 or more than 200 community disabled groups.
Just on that point, Barnsley is not covered by many parish councils.
Yeah.
Very limited number of parish councils in Barnsley, comparative to other areas.
You would not feel.
No.
I mean, we can't contact if they don't exist.
I
know, we are doing other channels.
I think that's a fair point to make. And when we talk about venues and opportunities to speak to people, I think the amount of footfall we get in Barnsley Town Centre comparative to many other places is to be an ideal opportunity to do that consultation or encourage people to participate by doing an event in Glassworks Square.
So we're doing. We did one in Barnsley last week. I know there's Barnsley Interchange next week, I think it is, and Doncaster Interchange next week as well. We did Rotherham Library area on Tuesday. So there's a whole mix, and then we're out at some of the more remote areas as well. So I've got a list of venues if anyone needs to see them, or they're on the website as well, on our landing page, because we keep adding to them as we've been adding the venues. Yep.
I guess the question on that, Mick, would be how much is this being pushed on Barnsley Council's social media? I know it did go up when it initially went out, but we do have quite good active social media channels, really. So to what extent is it being pushed, and could it be pushed a little bit more? But I'm sure that's something that Steve's going to follow up on.
Yeah, again, so we're going to contact the councils around using your email newsletters, because I know as a Doncaster resident I get one every month or so. So,
I've got Brian.
Oh, sorry.
What about bus stations? How many consultation events have you had around bus stations itself, major ones?
We're doing each one of them, of the major ones. Then they're next week. So we did Doncaster French Gate yesterday. Next week we're going to do Doncaster Interchange, actually in the bus station. So we've sent an engagement pack to all 30 faith leaders who attended the faith leader meeting. All 81 libraries have had an engagement pack, and we've asked them to promote it, so they've got to go the material to promote it when people go in. Local area committee forums have been contacted. We're going to run 5 focus groups that are run by our independent consultants, who will gather qualitative data from those focus groups there in the next couple of weeks. And we've got a lot of comms activity going on generally, promoting the whole consultation. I said from the data to date, we're going to do some responsive targeting of 4 groups, which are the under 25, ethnic minorities, Barnsley and Rotherham, because they're the areas where our data to date is showing response rates are low. So we're going to kilter some of the expend on marketing and comms to those areas in particular, try and increase response rates. So that's most of the statistics on the actual consultation. Also, there'll be translated versions available in 4 languages, and there's Google Translate, and our material is screen reader compliant for disability reasons. So, like I say, to date we've been very pleased with the response rates. Just they're a bit uneven, so we're going to try and even those out. So what next after the consultation closes? Our independent consultants, DJS, will do analysis of all the consultation responses, and they'll split that across different demographics and different response rates, etc. And the Mayor will be given that to give consideration to those consultation responses as part of his decision-making process. They will report to the current proposal is a report to the March MCA for the MCA board to make a recommendation to the mayor as to whether to proceed with franchising or not. The mayor will then have to make a decision based on all material consideration, including this consultation and the responses. If the mayor approves making a scheme, the MCA then moves into what's called the transition phase, and you could possibly see bus services franchised in the first tranche from 2027. Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be reported back to before March. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. On the what's next page, it says Mayor will give conscientious consideration
Yes.
to consultate. I mean, I'm a politician, Steve. I'm not averse to a little bit of spin speak, but what on earth does that mean?
It's sort of lawyer speak for he will take that into account conscientiously, with no predetermination of decision. He will see what people respond and will take that into consideration along with all other material considerations.
Right. Okay.
No stone unturned.
So he'll read them fundamentally. So does it mean?
Think about them, I assume,
Read them
and give consideration to them. Yeah.
Okay. And what forms, so do those responses form a material consideration? So, so for example, in planning, we know that you can get 3,500 objections to a planning proposal, but fundamentally, if it meets planning law, it goes through regardless. So, how material are people's responses on this?
I don't think there's a precise answer. I think the mayor will want to see what the public are saying, and the statutory consultees, because it is, there is a list of statutory consultees, and it may lead him to want to change the design of the scheme or some other proposals in the scheme, or it might be so overwhelmingly support or negative that he either doesn't proceed or proceeds exactly as is. But it's one of the considerations he has to give. The bland answer is he has to take a reasonable decision based on all the evidence. So this is part of that pack of material considerations he'll have to take into account.
I have another question about that decision-making process. Right, thank you, that's fine. And the MCA board, who will make a recommendation to the mayor on whether to proceed with a franchising scheme or not, does the MC board get to see the consultation responses from the public and from the statutory consultees?
So what everyone will get to see is the consultation analysis report and the consultation response report. There are two separate documents, and they'll also be made public. So when the papers go out for the MCA board, those packs which analyse, so DJS will effectively code every answer that comes in those consultation responses to produce a report that shows the trends and the themes of responses.
Yeah.
So they'll all get to see that along again with the statutory consultation. So let's say one of the bus operators puts in particular thoughts and ideas, they'll see that and the responses to those in that consultation response report.
And the MCA board makes a recommendation to the mayor, but the mayor is this is a mayoral decision.
So this is the quirk with the decision to proceed with bus franchise is a mayoral decision under legislation.
Right, purely a mayoral decision.
Purely mayoral decision.
Yeah. So the MCA board could say no. All of the constituencies could say no, and the mayor could go, "Going to do it anyway."
For these reasons, I will still proceed. Yeah.
That's fine. I just wanted to check that. Thank you.
Laura?
I suppose the conscientious consideration, I mean, I don't think it would make a decision that went against anybody on the board, because the whole purpose of this, I suppose, is to avoid legal challenge.
Well, I think the legislation requires the mayor to run requires the MCA to run a consultation for the mayor to consider as part of that decision-making process.
But potentially there could be legal challenges, so we would have to be
clear
that we've done everything properly.
If you didn't run the consultation, it would be, I mean, Rebecca's MO wouldn't allow the decision to go forward because we wouldn't have followed the procedure. The statutory procedure. So, the statute lays out the process, which includes a statutory and public consultation element. You can't have too many lawyers.
Douglas?
Yeah, thanks. So I just, I guess conscientious consideration means he'll think about it. But with the consultation, what are we actually expecting to learn from it in terms of evidence? I mean, I guess we'll get evidence of whether there's broad support for franchising in, so whether there's broad support for franchising, which, but in terms of evidence, is there anything that we're expecting to get out of this?
I mean, there is free form text boxes, for example, in the consultation, so people can express their views about what they like or don't like about the current bus network. So obviously, the statutory consultees, could say, we don't agree with your analysis in your assessment of this, this, and this. We think you should do this, this, and that. So, there is opportunity, as well as a broad understanding of what different demographics think about these type of proposals. So, there are various learnings from it, but it is an opportunity for people to say, because some people that I've been at the consultation event have concerns, and they will no doubt respond with those concerns as well. So that might be something that the decision makers and the MCA need to ponder and decide how to address those issues. Even if they proceed with franchising, there might still be things to learn from this to take into account.
Second question, if I like, is so just going back to the earlier paper we were looking at about the outcome of the autumn statement, and also got a very clear message from government there that the national bus fare cap, which we know is going to apply here, is going up from £2 to £3. It's a 50% increase. Fuel duty for private cars is being frozen, so it's very much a steer from government to basically incentivise private car use over public transport. But that's got to affect the franchising model, just in terms of the economics of running a bus service. Is there any way of factoring that into the consultation? I mean, that will fundamentally change the finances. Well, so both economically and in terms of that fairly obvious government steer, really.
I'm not sure in the consultation now we would change the consultation, but I think the government has policies equally that are pro-bus as far as and that's a political viewpoint, I suppose. People are entitled to take, aren't they? But the fare cap is a cap. It doesn't stop operators going back to charging less than if they were charged less than that before. So or having better value return tickets. Some operators changed their offering on return tickets with the £2 cap, which actually probably disincentivised travel as well. It made it more expensive. It went from £3 something to £4 for a return. So, I think this is about the structure of the industry, and actually, is the current structure right or wrong for delivering what the MCA's strategic aims for buses are?
Josh?
Thanks. So we've just been given the numbers of individual the 4 districts of South Yorkshire. I hope you are looking more deeper into that, though. Perhaps what areas, for example, of Rotherham, have responded so far to the consultation, and then you are moving along with that. So, for example, there might be rural areas in Rotherham that suffer the greatest with the current bus situation, and I hope you are taking that into account and making sure that this is fed back into them. I assume with the leaflets that's what you're doing, that's what you talked about, you're dropping those into rural places?
I mean, the leaflet drops have to be planned, but we are looking at, we've particularly targeted termed harder to reach areas, where response rates are lower generally anyway. Glibly I could say that probably means areas of South West Sheffield could probably get less leaflets than, because we get higher response to those areas. So they are targeted at harder to reach areas. So I think by actual that will hit some of that target we'll be talking about. Like I say, our comms and marketing team are doing taking responsive action to the data we're getting in, because we're getting it cut by district, age, gender. So there's only so much we can change, but some of the online or targeted stuff we can adapt to try and increase those rates. But equally, like we're saying, we're hoping to engage with the local authorities because they have contact with your residents in those areas and yourselves, the parishes. Anything we can do to increase those rates, will be gratefully received. So, like I say, SCC this week have put it in their newsletter. So that just seems a very simple way of reaching a lot of households at no cost, effectively. We've done a lot on the public consultation and continue to do so. Try to drive up those response rates.
I mean, I think it's also up to us around this table to make sure we get that consultation out to as many people as possible from what political area, from where they come, because at the end of the day, those services affect everybody. And regarding the outcome of the consultation, any politician, and I know the Mayor's just walked in, will consider all aspects on it, and it'll be their political future when they make any decisions on any kind of thing, because that's when politicians make decisions. They make decisions to make sure they get elected again, and any politician who sat around this table says they don't do that, they're not politicians, because all politicians want to get re-elected, and they make decisions on how to get re-elected. They do.
Oh, lost them.
Since Oliver's just got out, any other questions for you?
Any further questions?
I can fill the void for a minute if you.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
South Yorkshire now, I mean.
Right, okay, we're moving on now swiftly to agenda item number 13, which is Mayoral Scrutiny. Welcome, Mayor Oliver Coppard. Oliver, thank you for being here. And questions? Got Josh first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Oliver. I just wondered, are you aware of the nationally significant solar projects being proposed in large parts of Rotherham and parts of Doncaster as well, actually? And given that it's a nationally significant project and it's no longer held with RMBC or Doncaster Council, would you step in to ensure that the views of residents are heard on this by the Planning Inspectorate and the Secretary of State, given the potential changes to the look and feel of Greenbelt land, agricultural land?
Thanks for the question. So I am aware of it, and it is a big scheme. I think we all probably agree that we are in a climate emergency and we need to see projects come forward that help us through that climate emergency. In South Yorkshire, as I have said repeatedly, needs to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. It's why, for instance, we're so supportive of reopening Doncaster Sheffield Airport and making that a sustainable aviation hub so we can make sure that aviation is sustainable. I recognise that these things are always difficult. They are always going to be difficult when you put in place big schemes. I know that your party wasn't quite as keen on some of those schemes, for instance onshore wind, and there have been changes in that regard since the election, because we do need to see that energy generation is taking place. I've got no doubt that the council are listening to the views of local residents. I've got no reason to believe that I can add to that conversation. As mayor, my belief is that the government are looking at how planning changes over time in order to unlock planning potential, and so it is possible that over time mayors get more input into and control over planning, particularly around housing, but generally over planning. And at that point, I am more than happy to involve myself in local planning matters. But at this point, I think it's probably more helpful for Doncaster, for Rotherham to control the planning process and take that through in the way that they always do, which is by listening to residents.
Thanks for that. No, just because this is just a vastly different planning application compared to the usual planning applications. You know, this doesn't actually sit with the councils in this regard. It actually sits with the Planning Inspectorate and the Secretary of State. And so I just wondered, in that regard, if you would be formulating a view, and why would you not formulate a view on that, considering this is so different. In fact, in Rotherham, I think it's the first time that there's ever been a nationally significant project.
So as part of these planning applications, there are processes in place, and we will, as ever, follow the process in place. Doncaster, Rotherham Council are the appropriate council in this regard, and they will, I'm sure, have a view, and they will be talking to residents so that those views are taken into account by the Secretary of State and by the Planning Inspectorate. And I will do the thing we are asked to do by the system, and involve myself in any way we need to be involved. But more broadly, I think the principle is we do need local energy generation and schemes, and the comments I've seen online, and listen, this will not reflect all the views in the communities impacted, but the views I have seen are people are actually quite supportive of solar when it's done in the right way, and they would rather solar actually in some instances than housing. So, you know, we do need to make sure that we are using our land appropriately, and we do need to consult communities, and on that point you are absolutely right. But equally, we do need to make sure that these schemes get built where they are appropriate and where they are the right thing to do, and that's what the process is designed to assure us over.
Douglas? Yeah, thanks, Hello, Oliver. I was going to say, I hope you were speaking up for all the residents of Rotherham who don't want electricity. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, down with that sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. We were just discussing before about bus franchising and how it's getting on. So obviously, middle of the consultation. The question I was asking, possibly unfairly to Steve, because it's really for you, is where we're going with the sort of national steer from governments. And the autumn statement was pointing out that you're raising the bus cap, which is the fare, from £2 to £3, so a 50% increase in bus fares. At the same time, freezing petrol duty on individual cars. So, in reality, for people who've got a choice, it's very much the incentive to not get on the bus and drive into town instead, and that's coming from national government. So, it's twofold to the question, really. One is, how does that affect the steer on franchising? Because it's a disincentive to use public transport, sadly, but that's got to affect the economics of the case. So it's a case of how much do you think it affects that, and what can be done given that we're in the middle of a consultation on it. I suppose the second point is what leverage have you be able to try and have on central government to address that, or stop it happening, or compensate for it, or whatever.
Thank you. So,
yeah.
Worth pointing out that the consultation is taking place. So for the hordes of people who are watching online, it's please do. Both of them should fill in the consultation that is currently available to everybody. So I'm really proud to say that through that consultation we've already had over 3,600 responses, which is no small feat. You will all know from kind of public consultations that you've been involved in with yourselves, like that, you don't always get that level of engagement and interest, and I think that does speak to the public support for changes to the system. I hope that we're able to kind of take that forward over time in the way that we've already described, but through that process we are keen to get to a point quickly where we can make the decision on franchising, and the plan is to be able to take that decision early next year. And I've been very clear about my position on franchising previously, although right at this moment in time I have to be a bit more careful and circumspect about how I articulate those views. Look, there is no doubt that we need to get to a place where more people are using public transport, and I think we would certainly agree on that. I would hope that everyone around the table agrees on that. Certainly, kind of, you know, I am ambitious for bus franchising. I'm ambitious for public control that we took in last March around the Supertram, and then extensions and renewal of the Supertram as well. Active travel is a big part of our plans in South Yorkshire, and I think we've done a huge amount. I've got a huge amount more to do on active travel, but there is always going to be a point where people need to use a car. And that is in South Yorkshire a really important point. And I know the area that you represent is better served than some places, not perfectly served by public transport, but better served than some other parts of South Yorkshire that I am responsible for. And therefore I do have to represent, and gladly represent, all of those views. And loads of people in South Yorkshire are going to be relying on cars because, quite honestly, after 14 years of decline. We have lost a huge number of our bus services in South Yorkshire because we did not get the support from government to be able to support the buses in the way that I know you would want and I want, and therefore right at this moment in time I do think it's right, when we've got a cost of living crisis, for the government to support motorists. I would like over time that to be phased down. I would like to get to a point where there absolutely was huge support for public transport, and at this moment in time we do have to think about the balance of that. But at this moment I do think it's right that we support motorists to some extent, as well as trying to move forward with franchising as quickly as we can to get to a place where public transport is a genuine option. My overall position on this is we need to give everybody freedom and choice about how they travel and move, and if we can do that and we offer a genuine alternative, then I have no doubt, as in London, people will actually use that genuine alternative. But at the moment it's not good enough, and that's why we have to support people to be able to use their cars when they need to.
But just to go back, it's pretty understood. One of the luckier parts of South Yorkshire, and we're not suggesting that cars will disappear, but there's been a conscious decision to switch the incentive there. But really, it's the practical question of, as far as you know, what's the response you're getting on how that's likely to affect the whole franchising assessment? I mean, do the numbers still work?
Yes, they absolutely still work. So the consultation is in play right now, and it's based on the assessment we've already done. So to a certain extent, that doesn't change, frankly. You use the language of incentives, and I appreciate why you do that. But actually, frankly, what we're doing is supporting people. What the government are doing is supporting people who are using their cars at a time when we have a cost of living crisis. And I appreciate that these decisions are never easy. There are always there's a balance to be struck and views on either side. I do think, though, I can understand why the government have chosen to help motorists at this point when the bus services aren't good enough. You do, I think, recognise that we have somebody in Louise Haigh in the region, but also nationally, who is dead serious about getting people onto public transport. That's why we just got more money for buses. That's why she just put £1 billion in to buses, and why we're getting more money in South Yorkshire than we were promised previously.
Right, Hannah.
Thanks, Tim. Hi there, Oliver. I've got a few quick fire questions. I'm happy to defer to someone else. Yeah, no, it's none of them are going to be what's your favourite Taylor Swift song, I promise. So I know it's so hard, that one. There's so many to choose from. So here in South Yorkshire, are we going to go with the government's increase, 50% increase, taking the bus fare cap up to £3, or are we sticking with it at £2?
The bus fare cap, the national bus fare cap, will apply in South Yorkshire. Can I just refer back to a moment ago, so I know that Councillor Johnson said that the cap equals the fare, and I'm not trying to make a political point here. I just think it's really important that people understand that the fare is not £3. The fare is the fare. The cap is £3, and the average cost of a fare in South Yorkshire is actually £2.64. So we should not expect people, because my worry is that people will get on the bus and ask for a £3 fare. And that is my fear, and that is not true. What we need to do is transition people back onto, because we've lost some of this through the fare cap. We need to transition people onto those multi-saver tickets, so that people are using those tickets more, because they actually offer better value. So we want people to be aware that the cap is the cap, not the actual fare, and there are other ways of buying tickets. So.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Just an update from you, please, on your conversations with the council leaders as to how we are going to bring them into the sort of accountability and scrutiny conversations. Have you made any progress on that?
I'm afraid I don't have anything back to report, but I'm really sorry, but that is on me. We will come back to you. I will ask for an update and write to you if that's okay about where that is.
No, that's fine. Letting us know that there is no update is still an update, in my opinion. I'm going to ask this one first. So we've been having some conversations today about the budget and the devolution plans and the combined settlements that are coming to us. And it mentioned in one of those papers that we've had today that our submission to government was pragmatic. So we made some, I think, fairly restrained requests, sort of keeping in mind, what we know is the kind of the Treasury situation. But I'm interested to know, was that the approach that all of the other MCAs took? Did they all put in fairly kind of restrained, pragmatic submissions, or did some of them go a bit wilder? And did they get more as a result of that ambition?
See what you've done there, Hannah, and I'm not going to go for it. I would not necessarily agree with your framing as of pragmatism as a lack of ambition. So, for instance, pragmatism, I think, could refer to the fact that with the single settlement, we are not in a place in South Yorkshire where, should we be given that, for instance, in April, that we would be able to accept that money in that way now, because our systems in this building would simply not be able to cope with the fact that we were given all that money in one chunk. Essentially, it's not quite straightforward as that, as you know, but like, you know, essentially given that in one big chunk rather than the way it's currently given to us, given the complexity of the financial accounting and arrangements that we have here and the way in which we need to report it. So the pragmatism is often things like, actually, when can we, what's the first possible moment we can take that on? And we think that is more likely to be 2026. So there are instances where actually being ambitious means being pragmatic, by saying what is the first possible moment when we can do that pragmatically, and therefore kind of take that on as soon as possible. I think we have been ambitious in the bid that we put into government. It's one reason, for instance, why we got more money for buses. So a huge uplift in percentage terms. I always want more, but a huge uplift in percentage terms around buses through the BSIP announcement, and that was because as part of that submission into the budget, we said categorically we want more money for public transport in South Yorkshire. So kind of in some areas like that, we have absolutely been really ambitious in what we're asking for. Equally with things like Supertram extension and renewal, kind of being able to say to the government, it's really important to us that we get money from them to do this rather than it just comes out of our pocket. That is, I think, a big and ambitious kind of scheme, one that hasn't been tried in South Yorkshire now for nearly 30 years. So in all those ways, we are being really ambitious, and the government knows and recognises that level of ambition and is responding to that in kind.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think we all absolutely agree that the funding situation for us is looking much better going forward. But just to clarify for me, this is a point I'm not entirely sure on. Are some of the other MCAs already on that combined settlement type agreement? Yeah. So they were possibly in a position. I guess they were possibly in a position when they made their submission to government ahead of this first budget to, I guess, know a little better. So we're still playing catch up to some extent.
Well, we are, because the last government didn't give us a Trailblazer deal. So there were two places in the country, West Midlands and Greater Manchester, who were given by the last government Trailblazer deals, and South Yorkshire clearly was not. And so I was saying routinely to the government, last government, we want the same powers as they have, because otherwise we're always left behind. And you know, you see the growth in Manchester and Greater, in West Midlands, and it's impressive. And actually, we want some of those other tools that they already have in their toolbox. Things like, for instance, business rate retention is another thing that we're asking for. But on the single pot settlement, this government have quickly recognised that that was the right approach. And to be fair to Michael Gove, he said he was going to give it us, but he didn't. So kind of actually, we are now in a place where we are catching up with those other places, because they aren't being given kind of single settlement Mark II. They're in the same place as we will be in 2026.
And then one more question, if I might. One more. It's my last one, I promise.
We're doing them quick.
Yeah, I'm quick. So, because of this move to the single settlement, we're moving from this project-led focus, where we're very clearly identifying projects, to this bigger pot of money. How do you propose to engage with the public on the sort of priorities going forwards as we move away from that much sort of tighter and specific project-led way of working that has massive restraints, but we've got used to it? How are you going to engage the public and make those decisions as you put together that growth plan? Is that going to be sort of top down, or is it bottom up? And either way, what's the top and what's the bottom?
I have been clear and was re-elected 6 months ago on a very, I think, clear manifesto about the things I want to achieve, and those things will remain the things I want to achieve, partly because I have a mandate to achieve them, and that was the contract essentially that I signed with the public when I was elected. So those things will not change. They may be added to, frankly, but I will always try and deliver those to the best of my ability. And the single pot settlement and the increased funding that we will hopefully receive will allow us to do that quicker, and in some instances easier, and in some instances in a bigger and better way than otherwise we would have been able to do. If there are more freedoms and flexibilities that we get that allow us to do things that were not articulated in that manifesto, or additional powers that open up a space that we're not in, then of course I'm really happy to consult, to talk to our communities, as I like to think I always try and do. We've, I think, led the way in some of this. The Citizens' Assembly on Climate that we ran was a genuinely kind of pioneering approach to citizen engagement. I always try and get out of run more bus meetings than any other mayor, because I know how to have fun. So like, I have gone out and I try and do this. And if you want to feed in, if colleagues around the table want to feed in, this is not a party political approach. I want to hear what views look like from elected representatives and from our community. So we'll be in a better position once we know exactly what that looks like, and I'm happy to carry on this conversation, of course. But right now it's quite difficult to say this is what it'll look like, because I don't actually know quite what will be included in that and what won't. None of us do, but we're trying to get there soon.
Laura.
Very brief. What's the position, Oliver, with the PCC role?
Do you mean the funding, or do you mean the deputy mayor, or do you mean just broadly? Right. Okay, so we will be employing a deputy mayor for policing and crime in the way that other combined authorities do who have taken on this model, and at first I was actually quite keen to bring someone in quite quickly and to do that job. But I have to be honest, since I've taken on the role, I've actually been really kind of enjoying and found it very kind of useful to be able to step into that space where I'm understanding the role of the police and how they function in South Yorkshire, getting under the skin of the organisation and making sure that actually kind of we're working closely together in the first few months of that arrangement. And I think that's been really important, and more important in hindsight than I think I probably would have appreciated at the outset of that job. We will be bringing in that deputy mayor in the new year, and we're in the conversation at the moment, and we're talking to a couple of candidates in particular about that. There's a process on happening at the moment in order to see if they are the right fit, and then we will work out what the process looks like from there on. So I don't want to say too much, partly because it's unfair on the candidates if I do talk about that in any meaningful way. Otherwise, but we'll happy to come back and sort of talk about that in more in due course. I think it's really important that we do have someone over time, but as I say, over the last 6 months, particularly through things like the situation we saw at Mambers, the issue we've uncovered with South Yorkshire Police's budget as a result of some of the decisions that were taken prior to my appointment, then it has been important to be as close as possible to that, and I've been pleased to be able to do it.
I've got a question. So you've described, or your press or was it good transport pleased, or whatever, I can't remember what the exact phrase was, on the bus, or the transport funding you've got. I understand that we haven't got we may have got the Barrow Hill line, but we haven't got the Stocksbridge line. That's what I know?
No, that's not quite right. So no, so on the Restoring Your Railway schemes that were, there was money, I think there was 70 million notionally allocated to those schemes, and it was largely feasibility, frankly, schemes. I'm going to have to go in like 3 minutes, I'm afraid, because I've got a call with Tracy Brabin. I hope that was communicated in terms of my diary. Barrow Hill and Stocksbridge were the two schemes that were going to be sort of tested through that feasibility work. The new government have said we're not going to go down that bad pun, sorry, we're not going to do that anymore, we're not going to take that approach. Now those were largely freight, seen as freight opportunities, and actually it's a good thing that they've been taken off the table, because what that means is we can look again at whether or not they are possible for tram train, and that's what we really want to do with them. We want to make them passenger lines, and so we're now talking to the department about those extensions, both including the Barrow Hill and the Stocksbridge line, but also actually looking at other opportunities as well, and then we need to engage in a conversation about the funding model for that.
Given your meeting Tracy Brabin, can you ask her for some good advice on how she's managed to, along with the mayors of Manchester and Liverpool, to keep the bus fare cap at £2 and you haven't?
Yeah. I can tell you that straight away, which is that because they had a better funding settlement from the last government, and also because Andy Burnham has been able to make more progress on franchising because he started before I did. So he's been doing franchising for 7 years, which means he controls the fare box and then can cross-subsidise. I'm not in that position because we haven't got there on funding. We were badly treated by the last government on BSIP funding, which means we don't have the revenue funding to be able to keep fares low.
This government hasn't restored that either to make it fairer to restore it for us.
Well, they certainly couldn't. They certainly couldn't backdate the amount of money that we lost out on. But from the last government, we asked for £560 million out of a £9 billion fund. It turned into a £3 billion fund. We got zero. So it's quite difficult for a new government to fix that problem.
Can you also ask her about why their trams are going to be sooner than 2032, whereas ours are much. Theirs seem to be much quicker to come on stream than our trams are.
Well, I'm happy to answer that question once they build it. I love Tracy. She's doing a brilliant job advocating for her tram system. I'm not entirely sure that the ambition will necessarily... Trams take a long time, they always do. And her ambition is exactly right, but it is a difficult thing to do.
Anyway, I know you've got to go away, and thank you very much for coming today, and we look forward to seeing more progress over lots of things that are in the progress. And thank you for the meeting today, and close that. Thank you. Bye.
Sorry, thank you.